We're looking at Crohn's disease or CD. We're not just, summarizing symptoms. We are going straight to the engine room. We need to unpack the underlying mechanism, trace its clinical progression, and spend some real time on one of its most critical complications, perianal disease and fistulas.
And the reason this is so vital really starts with one single, frankly, shocking statistic from these sources. 95% of Crohn's diagnoses have a delay of over 2 years. 2 years from when symptoms first appear. That delay is it's immense.
It's a profound challenge. And when a condition is this multifaceted, you have to understand its core engine, what's actually driving the inflammation, before you can even organize the symptoms. So let's start right there with that fundamental mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack it. The sources are very clear. This is not a simple stomach bug. It's a systemic breakdown. It's this destructive interaction of three main components all firing at once.
Right. So component number one is the microbiota.
The gut bacteria.
Exactly. We're talking about dysbiosis, which is just an imbalance. The good gut bacteria are diminished, and, harmful pathogens can start to flourish. That altered environment is really the foundation of the whole process.
So the ecosystem is completely out of whack. And that leads directly to component number two, the intestinal epithelium.
Yes, the mucosal barrier that lines the gut.
What's happening to it?
In CD, the integrity of that barrier it fails. Think of it like the mortar between bricks dissolving. This causes a huge increase in permeability. That's just a scientific term for leakage. The wall becomes porous.
And what exactly is leaking through?
Well, things that should absolutely stay inside the intestine. Bacteria, specific toxins, food particles. They now cross that compromised wall and flood into the deeper tissue. And that is the moment the systemic alarm bells start ringing, which triggers component number three.
The immune response.
The immune response.
The body thinks it's being invaded. So the innate and adaptive immune systems, the T cells, they go into this aggressive defense mode.
Precisely. But because the breach, that leakage, is chronic, the immune response becomes dysregulated. It never shuts off. It just keeps fighting this low-grade invasion, and this relentless, misdirected T-cell response is what drives the sustained, destructive inflammation of Crohn's.
What's so interesting about breaking it down like that is you can see exactly where the therapeutic research is aiming. If you know the wall is leaking and the immune response is overreacting, that tells you what to target.
It does. Current strategies are trying to hit both ends of that problem. You see a lot of effort going into restoring the epithelial barrier, trying to plug the leak, and at the same time, very specific attempts to modulate those runaway T-cell pathways to calm the inflammation down.
But let's go back to that 95% diagnostic delay. I mean, if the mechanism is this complex, how do clinicians even spot it early? The main symptoms are so vague: abdominal pain, which is in 75% of patients, and chronic diarrhea.
Right. The difficulty is differentiating those from countless other GI conditions. You have to look for persistence, severity, and, crucially, progression over time, which is why clinicians need a framework. They classify the disease by location and by how its behavior changes.
Okay, so let's start with location. That's categorized by L.
The end of the small intestine, the ileum, is a huge hotspot. So L1, that's ileal involvement, and it accounts for about 30% of patients.
Then you have L2, which is colonic, just in the large intestine. That's about 20%. But the big one seems to be L3, ileocolic, which is both. That's a huge 45% of cases.
And that combined location, L3, it hints at why the disease can be so severe. It's affecting nutrient absorption in the ileum and water reabsorption in the colon. And then there's the rare one, L4, upper GI, which is the stomach or duodenum, only about 5%.
So location is one thing, but the disease itself changes. It evolves. How does the behavior, which is designated B, progress?
The behavior classification is really a spectrum of severity. So everyone starts at B1. That's non-structuring, non-penetrating. This is just purely inflammatory disease. It's that active, aggressive inflammation we talked about.
And then it progresses from there.
Yes. B2 is the progression to stricturing. Chronic inflammation is led to scarring, to fibrosis, and the bowel lumen physically narrows. It's like scar tissue squeezing a tube shut. And then finally B3. This is the most critical progression, penetrating or fistulizing disease.
And the long-term risk there is pretty alarming. The sources say that 20 to 50% of patients will progress from that B1 inflammatory phase to the more complex B2 or B3 within 10 to 20 years.
And this progression helps us understand the symptoms better. Like the diarrhea, it's often persistent. And while only maybe 5 to 10% have visible rectal bleeding, a full half of patients have fecal occult blood, a hidden sign of that internal erosion.
Let's talk about the pain, since 75% of patients have it. My first assumption would be that pain is always from that acute B1 inflammation. But the sources suggest that the B2 strip shrink creates a different kind of pain.
That's a really key clinical distinction. While inflammation definitely causes pain, a lot of the severe recurring abdominal pain can actually be mechanical. When the gut is narrowed from a B2 stricture, a food bolus tries to squeeze through. That stretching of the intestinal wall, it stimulates mechanical receptors, and that causes an intense pain.
Wait, so how do you even tell the difference? How does a clinician differentiate that mechanical obstructive pain from inflammatory pain?
You can't, not by pain scale alone. That's why imaging and endoscopy are so critical. If the pain is mostly postprandial, so right after eating, and it comes with nausea or bloating, that strongly suggests a partial obstruction from B2 stricturing. Then the treatment shifts away from just anti-inflammatories to maybe even surgery or balloon dilation.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move to the most complex part, the B3 behavior. This deep dive into perianal disease and fistulas, this seems to be where the diagnosis often gets crystallized.
This is absolutely critical. Perianal disease affects 40% of all CD patients. But here's the big red flag. In up to 25% of patients, the perianal disease comes first. It can be the earliest visible sign of Crohn's, sometimes years before they develop classic gut symptoms.
That statistic totally reframes how you have to think about it. If you see persistent perianal issues, you can't just think it's a local skin problem. So how does the body actually build this fistula, this trans-wall connection?
It starts with what's called transmural inflammation. That chronic inflammation we discussed eats through all the layers of the intestinal wall. It forms a small channel, a sinus tract, which just keeps penetrating outward till it breaches the serosa, the outer layer, and tunnels until it connects to another surface. That's the fistula.
And the sources gave us this almost molecular level explanation for it, something called epithelial to mesenchymal transition. That sounds like cellular engineering gone completely wrong.
It is. Think of the specialized epithelial cells that line the gut as organized, peaceful construction workers. In the presence of chronic inflammation, driven by these master conductors like TNF-alpha and TGF-beta, those workers undergo a fundamental transformation.
And what are those conductors doing?
Well, TNF-alpha is a primary inflammation signal, while TGF-beta is often involved in fibrosis and tissue repair gone awry. Under their influence, the epithelial cells transform into these highly mobile, invasive mesenchymal cells.
So the specialized workers turn into a cellular demolition crew.
Exactly. These new mesenchymal cells aren't confined to the lining anymore. They are programmed to migrate, and they actively chew a path through the intestinal wall, driving that tissue invasion and creating the fistula tract.
That's a powerful picture of that B3 progression. And there's a strong link between this and pre-existing narrowing, isn't there? Having an anorectal stricture really amplifies the risk, 60% prevalence versus 30%.
Right. The physical obstruction likely increases internal pressure, which pushes the infectious process through the weakened wall. To manage this, clinicians rely on some key classification systems. For the learner, the most practical guide is probably Goodsall's rule.
I found this rule so elegant. It simplifies this incredibly complex anatomy. It predicts the likely internal path of the fistula based just on where the external opening is.
Yes. If the external opening is anterior towards the front, the tract usually runs straight to the anal canal. But if the opening is posterior towards the back, it typically takes a curved path to the posterior midline. It's a very quick way to anticipate what you're dealing with.
And beyond Goodsall's, they're classified by complexity. A simple fistula is what? Low-lying, single opening.
Right. Low-lying, below the lower third of the external anal sphincter, one external opening. The real problem comes with a complex fistula. High origins, multiple external openings, and they often involve major nearby structures. The classic example is a rectovaginal fistula, a huge complication. And specialists use these detailed grading systems, like the St. James classification, to map the tract's path in relation to the sphincter muscles. They're literally planning surgery with these grades.
And moving beyond the perianal area, that B3 penetrating behavior can show up in some truly unusual ways. The clinical signs are just bizarre if you don't know the pathology.
Wow. These are the non-perianal fistulas. When the tract connects the bowel to the bladder, an enterovesical fistula, the results are unforgettable. The patient might have recurrent UTIs that never clear up, or the very specific symptom of pneumaturia.
Passing air in the urine.
Passing air in the urine because gas from the intestine is getting into the bladder. That's a definitive sign. Similarly, an enterovaginal fistula can allow gas or feces to pass through the vagina. And then you have enterocutaneous fistulas, where bowel contents drain right to the skin surface. They immediately point to advanced penetrating disease.
We touched on gastroduodenal Crohn's, or GDCD, that rare L4 classification, only 0.5% to 4% of cases. Since it's so high up in the system, how does it present?
Well, because of the location, it often mimics more common things like peptic ulcers or severe reflux. You get high abdominal pain, severe nausea, vomiting, weight loss. And because it's so rare, it can easily be missed if you're only thinking about the more common locations.
And to diagnose these rare presentations, physicians rely so heavily on what they actually see, endoscopically or on radiology. This section of the sources had some of the most memorable visual descriptions.
They really paint a picture of the tissue damage. Endoscopically, they're often looking for the signature cobblestone appearance. This is from deep linear ulcers separated by swollen mucosa. It literally looks like a cobblestone street.
A very powerful visual. What else might they see?
In the context of gastroduodenal CD, they might see rosary-like protuberant lesions or notching of the duodenal folds. It just indicates that aggressive, localized inflammation high up in the small intestine.
And the radiological signs are just as vivid. My favorite was the ram's horn sign.
The ram's horn sign is a classic finding in advanced gastroduodenal CD. You have chronic scarring, a B2 stricture, at the gastric outlet. So radiologically, this narrowing, with the dilated stomach behind it trying to push food through, it just resembles the curved shape of a ram's horn.
And they also look for the pseudo-Billroth-eye appearance, where the stomach and duodenum look like a simple tube because of all the inflammation and scarring. These signs are the definitive evidence that helps differentiate Crohn's.
There are the maps that trace the B behavior progression in a physical way.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for the learner? We've really dissected the whole mechanism. We started with that molecular engine microbiota, epithelial failure, T-cell inflammation. Then we mapped the disease with the L and B classifications, showing that huge progression risk to B2 and B3 complications.
And we really focused on that penetrating behavior, exploring the epithelial to mesenchymal transition, that cellular demolition crew, and using practical tools like Goodsall's rule to give structure to it. It's a disease that's really defined by its progression.
It just requires extreme vigilance for those subtle early signs.
And that leads us right back to where we started. It brings up one final provocative thought for you to consider. If we know that 95% of CD patients have that 2-year diagnostic delay, and we also know that up to 25% of patients first present with perianal disease before any major gut symptoms, then how fundamentally does the systematic early recognition of perianal fistulas and accurately classifying them change the entire long-term clinical trajectory for that patient, specifically in preventing that devastating progression from B1 to the highly morbid B2 and B3 behaviors? That connection between that early, seemingly local symptom and the whole disease progression, that's key.